Today we are going to study all those disturbing topics related to our own existence. Where we come from, where are we going? What is the object of existence? What do we live for? What are we here for? Why are we here? These are really enigmatic questions, which all of us must solve. First of all, if we want to know something about ourselves, we have to start by exploring ourselves. The physical body is just the densest part of ourselves. It is made up of organs, and the organs are made up of cells, and the cells of molecules, and the molecules of atoms. And if we open an atom, we release energy. But the physical body is not everything. Mr. Immanuel Kant, the philosopher of Königsberg, already said that there was a nexus formativus for our organism. I believe that a house without a foundation falls to the ground. So too, I firmly believe that an organism without a base has to disintegrate, has to end. For an organism to exist, there must be a base, and that base is none other than the vital body. The vital body is the seat of organic life. Many will say, and where is that vital body? What will Samael base on to talk to us about the vital body? Well, I want to tell you that in Russia, there is already an extremely powerful optical perception device. With this device, the vital body is currently being studied. They are seeing it, and they already have it photographed. So I am not talking to you about something that cannot be seen. Right now, the Russians are submitting it to different analyses. They study the vital body in relation to organic mechanics. They study it independently of the organism. In any case, it is already photographed. They have baptized it. Yes, of course. They have given it a name. They now call it bioplastic body. Yet, the Hindustani have been talking about the vital body for a long time. They denominated it in all the times with the name of Linga Sarira. So they have a basis. The curious thing is that Russian scientists believe that they are the first to have discovered it. There is no such thing. The vital body is known by the sages of all ages. It has always been analyzed. It has 4 classes of ethers. The first is the chemical ether, which is intimately related to the chemical processes of the organism. The second is the ether of life. It is related precisely to the issue of animal reproduction. The third is the luminous ether, through which perceptions, calories, etc. are possible. And finally, we have the reflecting ether that is the center of the imagination and of the will. So a physical body without its vital seat, it is obvious that it would not exist. But what is there beyond the physical body with its vital seat? Beyond, we find the ego. And what is the ego? It is a sum of different psychological factors. It is a multiplicity. It is a lot of people. This means that the I is not one I, but I's or me's. The I exists in a pluralized form. Each of our psychological defects is personified by some ghost, by some I. And since we have many defects, obviously we have many I's. Anger is one I, greed is another, lust another, envy another, pride another, laziness another, gluttony another, and from there to there, thousands of I's follow. Each I seems to be a true person. It has an intellectual center, it has an emotional center, and it has a motor instinctive sexual center. Thus, within one person live many persons, and these are the I's. The most worthy thing we have inside us is the soul essence. Unfortunately, the soul essence is bottled up within all those I's. That is why it is asleep, unconscious. This means that all of us human beings are asleep, unconscious. However, people firmly believe that they are awake, and there is no truth to that. They are not awake. An unusual case comes to mind at this moment. About 22 years ago, more or less, we lived in the Federal District, Mexico, and we had our house located precisely in the Federal neighborhood. One of those many days, the Master Litilantes and I were in a jewelry store having a watch repaired near a market, which there they call the Gomez Market. Suddenly, something unexpected happened. A dynamite explosion. Nearby, there was a clandestine dynamite deposit, and one of those deposits exploded. The explosion was terrible. The air seemed to darken the sun. All kinds of things were seen in space, turned to pieces, and there is no doubt that there were very many dead. Then she told me, well, it is best that we go back home. I told her, in order to return home, we have to go to the corner. At the corner, we must take a bus that would drive us back home. But it so happens that the corner is dangerous, because there is going to be another explosion. She said, no, I want to go back. It would be absurd, I told her. Let's wait a bit. At those precise moments, the fire trucks sounded. Then I told her, of all those firefighters who just arrived, not one is going to come out alive. Said and done. Those humble servants, then, of humanity, because that is how we can call those smoke swallowers, courageous beings who give their lives for human beings. Well, they got into the most dangerous place where there were nothing less than more deposits of dynamite. A few moments later came a second explosion, even more terrible than the first. A fatal wind came. The walls of that market seemed to collapse. All the vendors fled and the market was empty. The stalls there, they left their money there. They left everything there. At that moment, they didn't even have time to think about their money. The women with their little boys fled in the midst of tears, shouts, and anguish. So, I told her, instead of continuing home, now we better go to the center of the city. We go to the Zocalo. Indeed, all of that morning, the red and green crosses were transporting people, wounded people, transporting dead in large numbers, etc. That was terrible. Well, before we left for the Zocalo, we could see no less than 300 corpses from a distance, lying on the ground. On that corner where we should theoretically take the bus that would take us back home. It is obvious that if we had approached that corner as she intended, we would have been killed, since all those who stood on that corner died. I estimate that around 300 curious people who approached the area of the explosions died. The curious are always the Paganinis, those who pay, in all these catastrophes. That is why I advise you not to be curious, and that kind of danger will always be avoided. Well, what would have happened, I say to myself, if we hadn't had slightly awakened consciousness? Obviously, we would have perished. Now, how do you explain that men as brave as the firemen threw themselves into the dynamite deposits like that? What is the use of being brave there? Do you know what a dynamite explosion is? But why did they do it? All those firemen perished. Only the boot of a sergeant was found. They were atomically disintegrated. There was no one to be buried, since nothing but a sergeant's boot was found. There is no doubt that they were asleep. Well, that could not be explained in any other way. If they had been conscious, they would never have gone there. In the dynamite deposits. Only sleeping people would do that. Of course, the justifications come. No, the courage. They showed their heroism. That is to say, we try to clean the thing, justify it as we can. But the reality is that they perished. That is the harsh reality of the facts. And they perished because their consciousness was asleep. Another of those many days, I was out there walking through those streets of the Federal District. Suddenly I came to a corner. I was around there when I saw a Luz y Fuerza worker who was coming along the sidewalk. And upon reaching that corner, with great astonishment, I see that a piece of the cornice of an old building that was there comes off. And it landed exactly on this unfortunate man's head. Sure, he'd dropped dead there. At that moment, I was seeing that he moved his hands and feet. But my concept was that he had to have died, because I saw that huge stone break off and fall exactly on his head. His companions put him in a car and took him away. Well, there is nothing strange about this. That a stone falls on a man's head and kills him. Well, That was an accident that has nothing to surprise us. An accident, and really that is not to surprise anyone. The amazing thing is not in that. The amazing thing is in the mass of people who gathered there, who were located exactly below, like this, looking up to see where the pieces of stone came from. That was what caused me astonishment. Not the accident, because it can happen to anyone, but for people to gather underneath it, like this. That behavior cannot happen to anybody but sleeping people. I assure you that an awakened person does not do that. I was perplexed at the time, not because of the accident, but because of the state of unconsciousness in which people are. That cannot be from awakened people. Fortunately, no more pieces fell off on top of them. If it had, it would have killed a few people more. Let us see how, for example, people react to accidents, to what has already happened. But never in life do I see you anticipating things, but always afterwards. If something happens to you, you rush, run to see what you can do, to see how you may remedy it, when and for what, when the thing has already happened. Why does that happen to you? Because you are asleep. Many times in the infinite cosmos there is a clash of worlds, because sometimes worlds collide. With a telescope they have been able to see them. Just as our cars collide, so the worlds of space sometimes crash. These are frightening catastrophes. Thus, estimate how terrible a clash of worlds will be. And then, that wave force comes here to our Earth, and what do the Earthlings do? They receive it and immediately go into activity. Wars are declared. They go to the battlefields. They raise slogans for democracy, for peace, for I don't know what, for I know how much. But they do not know what it was that sent them to war. Nothing more than the vibration that touched them from a clash of worlds in space. That force touched them. So there are millions of human beings against millions on the battlefields. They are fighting, but they don't know why. They are asleep. If they were awake, it is obvious that they would not be involved in it. So the human consciousness is asleep, that it is necessary to wake up. Of course, it is necessary to get out of that state of unconsciousness in which one finds oneself. If you had your consciousness awake, you could see, hear, touch the great mysteries of life and death. But you are asleep. In what year were you born, disciple? The question is indiscreet, isn't it? Samael Aun Weor. No, I don't see you with white hair yet. Well, so it is not indiscreet. Disciple, 1952. Samael Aun Weor, 1952. Okay, you were born in 1952. In 1950, I put out the first edition of my book, The Perfect Matrimony. So, I had written that book. What did you do in 1950? Where were you? Disciple, Samael Aun Weor. Well, try to solve that riddle here in front of the whole audience. Where were you in 1950? I put out my book, The Perfect Matrimony. First edition in 1950. What were you doing in that year? Where were you? Did you appear out there somewhere? Disciple, well, I don't remember. Samael Aun Weor. That is the state, then, of all humanity. I ask you, where were you 100 years ago? Could any of you tell? There are mathematical methods by which one can trace something of one's own life. I'm going to show you something. It is a curiosity that I'm going to show you tonight. Well, for example, let's see a brother here who gives me his date of birth. Do you remember what year you were born? Disciple, on July 31st, 1918. Samael Aun Weor. You were born in 1918? Well, you are a young man in relation to me. I was born much earlier, but in any case, we will take you into account. 1 and 9, 10. You see the sum that we are going to do. It is very nice. 1918. What amount does it give us? Disciple, 19. Samael Aun Weor. 19, right? It equals 19. Well, and 1, 9, 10. Ultimately, 1, 0 gives 1. Gives us Arcanum 1 of the Tarot. He is a man of initiative, a public man, etc., etc., etc. And if that had been in your work, go ahead. But that's not the point. We add the amount of 1918 like this. That is, I write the number 1918 below this amount, and at 1918, 1918, 1937. Thus, in 1937, there was an important change in his life. There was an important event in his life. In 1937, a change began. You have to remember now the year 1937, 1937. 1 and 9 is 10, and 3, 13, and 7, 20, as it were, resurrection of the dead. The beginning of something new in his life. The beginning, resurgence. Something new began in his life. He began his existence in a new way, that is, he resurfaced, as if he had risen, as if he had started and had begun in a different way. This was in 1937, but we can continue and add it like this. 1937, 1, 9, 3, 7, 1957. In 1957, there is another new aspect of his life. In 1957, 1 plus 9, 10 plus 5, 15 plus 7, 22. 2 equals 4. He laid foundations already in 1957. Now, the important thing is that you remember that date, those aspects, because you need a very good memory to remember exactly what was done in that year, 1957. I am teaching this procedure to you, mathematical, by means of which you can know a lot about your lives and your life in the present. 1957, we can put it like this, and then we add it like this. 1957, 1, 9, 5, 7. 1979. 1979 has another very important aspect of your life. In 79, 1979, 1 plus 9, 10 plus 7, 17 plus 9, 26, 2 and 6, 8. 8 is the number of job tests and pains for 1979. Tests and pains. The arcanum 8 of the tarot. One can trace one's life in that way. And you saw how one was able to trace one's life. It's the most you can do. Trace your life through mathematics into the future is clear. So then, our life unfolds mathematically. Well, in any case, I want to tell you the following. Death itself is nothing more than a subtraction of fractions. And that's it. For example, if we subtract fractions, what is left there? Let's see, disciple, the values. Samael Aun Weor, the values. What would be the result? Disciple, minus 1/4. Samael Aun Weor, sure, minus 1/4, then what remains? The values, right? In reality, the values represent indeed the human being. The I is but one sum of values, and that's it. That is, within us, there is a sum of values. We are mathematical points in space, which we agree to serve as a vehicle for certain sums of values. What are those values? Well, all the psychological elements that we carry inside, the I's of what I'm talking about, those are the values. We carry good eyes, too, and we carry bad eyes, and we carry useful eyes, and we carry useless eyes. Death is a subtraction of fractions. Once the mathematical operation is finished, the only thing that continues are the values. We are mathematical points in space, which we agree to serve as a vehicle for certain sums of values. That's obvious. Those values continue after death, swallowed by eternity. In eternity, these values attract and repel each other according to the law of universal magnetization. But those values later are expelled from eternity. Eternity vomits them out, and then they return. They recur. They develop new cells with their perceptions and sensations. They return to the world and become Mr. So-and-so, or a Mrs. or Miss or Mr. So-and-so. That is the harsh reality about the law of the eternal return of all things. It is a universal law. The stars return to the original starting point after many thousands of years. The atoms return within the molecule to their original starting point. Thus, we also return. The one who dies returns. You can be sure that he returns. That is why, out there in the Canticles of Solomon, or in the Psalms of Solomon, he says, "The thing that hath been, it is that which shall be, and that which is done is that which shall be done. And there is no new thing under the sun." Ecclesiastes 1:9. We all return. Life is like a movie, and it's just a movie. Death is the return to the original starting point and the end of the film. When one has reached the end, one rolls up his film and goes, as they say, with his music elsewhere. Eternity swallows him. But when you come back, when you return, when you rejoin, obviously, you show your picture again, just as it is. One cannot project another film but his, as it is, and projects it onto the screen of existence. That means that everything repeats itself as it happened. If in the past existence we had a tavern drama, or a tavern tragedy, we got into a fight with another person at the age of 25. In the new existence, at the same age of 25, we find ourselves a fighting ego. If you, for example, are listening to me, I say right here in this room, it will not be here in this house, no, but somewhere here in this city we met. I spoke to you and you listened to me, and now we have met again. This is the law called recurrence. If one returns, then repeat everything again, just as it happened. So, there are two laws. The law of the eternal return of all things, and the law of recurrence, in which everything happens again just as it happened. So, we all go back. Is there anyone who remembers their previous lives? Do you think there is? In the name of truth, I remember them. If I did not remember my previous lives, frankly, I would not dare to speak to you about the law of eternal return here in this room. Now notice that I am not charging you a dime, because anyone could lie for money. But I am not demanding 5 cents from you for your assistance. So for what purpose could I lie? Obviously, there would be no basis to lie. If I tell you that I remember my past lives, I mean it sincerely. For what purpose do I do it? To give a testimony simply of the doctrine. That's obvious. If they asked me what was my name and where did I live, and all of that matter, well, my name was Daniel Coronado, and I listed in the Revolution. I was one of the 30 Dorados of Pancho Villa. Why am I going to deny it? Well, it's true. At that time, I taught this doctrine to many people in a slightly cruder form, but I taught it in a more rudimentary way, but I taught it. And now I'm teaching it again. That is not a crime. If you wonder what existence was like, why not? I totally remember all the details. A very long life, which I begin to narrate to you, and we will spend all night talking about it. You know that in life one goes through many vicissitudes, many adventures, so that narrating a life is very long. In any case, yes, I was with Pancho Villa, with the División del Norte. That is the most important thing. And I left the body at will. And I entered this body at will. Why? Because I'm awake. And I can do it. I will narrate the end and the beginning of this existence, nothing else, because it would take too long to narrate a lifetime. Besides, you didn't come here to listen to other people's lives. In any case, I want to tell you that yes, in the last moments on my deathbed, a doctor arrived at the place, of course, where I lived. A filthy shack. It was in the Federal District. The doctor arrived and he took my pulse, sat in a chair, the only one that existed in that horrible room, shook his head, saying, "This case is lost." He withdrew because there was nothing else to do. I had acute peritonitis, and there were no remedies as effective as now to be able to combat acute peritonitis, already at the last moment. Then the doctor gone. The poor woman accompanying me cried out in pain. She implored to St. Peter and St. Paul and all the saints, but it was useless, because it was my time to disincarnate. Someone grabbed me then by the waist. I saw myself again. It's the angel of death. He cut the silver cord with his sickle, and there I am left without a body, disembodied in the astral world. The end of a long and hard life. Beginning of this, one of the great masters of the law of karma, those masters who govern the destiny of men and who live in the superior world, approached me and told me, "Master Samael Aun Weor, everything is ready. Follow me." I answered, "All right, Venerable Master, I will follow you." That adept went to a certain house, and I went after him. He entered an old house with a wide and cobbled hallway. He crossed a courtyard, came to a small room, and finally entered a bedroom. I heard there the cries of pain of a woman suffering labor pains. I looked at myself, and I saw that a very subtle thread connected me to that creature that was about to be born. It is the silver cord that Mr. Tuesday, Lobsang Rampa, explains so much about it. In the East, that cord is called the Antakarana, Sanskrit Antakran, and is said to have 7 different aspects. At the moment when the creature was born, at the moment when it took its first inhalation, is what happens to a man who is asleep. And another comes and touches him, and he wakes up instantly. That happened to me. Of course, at the moment when that creature made its first inhalation, I felt instantly pulled, attracted to the interior of that body, in that little body of a newborn child, with such great surprise that I couldn't help but let out some screams and some cries. They fixed my umbilical cord. They put me to bed next to my earthly mother. I saw a giant that approached me, looked and smiled at me. Of course, I had a small body, and that giant, well, he was my father, but I saw him as gigantic. I was little. I saw him as very giant. The giant smiled sweetly. I thought the giant was nice. He didn't bother me in the least. Thus, conscious, I remained inside the body. That body grew little by little. At 11 months, I say, well, it's time to start walking a little. I put my hands like this. I took a few steps with the intention of supporting myself for the first time with the new body, and I achieved it. I continued to grow, but conscientiously, without forgetting my past existence, without forgetting my relatives, my friends, without forgetting anyone. I only waited for the moment when the body served me so that I could leave that house from those people who gave me the body. I made the first rehearsal at 8 years old, but I noticed that I was not yet mature enough to be able to be enough for myself. I had to return home because there was no other choice. A little later, when you can already understand that I could be enough for myself, see, I left. Goodbye, I told them. Goodbye. And finally, here I am with you. To that end, I never lost consciousness, no, because already in very old existences I had worried about the awakening of the consciousness. I had already worked in that sense, and that helped me to be able to say where I was before I was born, and also to know where I am going after death. But if I hadn't worked on myself, if I hadn't managed to wake up, I'd be completely unconscious, like everyone else. So, in order to be able to know where you come from, where you are going, and what your name is, and all this, well, you have no choice but to awaken your consciousness. I am remembering at this moment a writer whose name was Vargas Villa. He clapped his hands, and around there a journalist approached him and said, "Your Honor, where do you come from and where are you going to? What is your name and how are you?" Then Vargas Villa, who was tremendous in the field of intellect, replied, I come from the east, and I go to the south. My name is Vargas, and I'm very well. Well, it's a nice anecdote about the writer named Vargas Vila. In any case, I do want to tell you that it is possible to awaken the consciousness. I am going to tell you how. Well, by disintegrating our psychological defects. But how does one go about disintegrating them? Well, one has first of all to discover them. Because we have defects that we ignore. One has to discover them in order to work on them. And where is one going to discover them? Well, in relation to people, in the street, in the public square, in the market, in the countryside, in the office. It is clear that if one is alert and vigilant like the sentinel in times of war, one discovers one's own defects, because the hidden defects surface spontaneously, naturally, when one least thinks about it. If one is alert, one sees them. A discovered defect must be worked on. That is, it must be studied, analyzed, deeply comprehended at any of all levels of the mind. When one has comprehended that one has, for example, the defect of anger, then what to do? One has no choice but to concentrate on one's divine mother Kundalini. Beg her, ask her to eliminate, to disintegrate that defect, and she will disintegrate it. And the consciousness embedded within it will be released. And if one disintegrates all the defects, the consciousness will be fully awake. And being perfectly awake, you can remember your previous lives. You can penetrate the mysteries, see what existed 1,000,000 years ago, etc. But if one is asleep, one cannot. And who is the divine Mother Kundalini? I tell you frankly, it is a variant of our own being, but a derivative. It is a part of ourselves, let's say, something that we all have inside, all of us, all of us. If we concentrate on that part, which is the divine Mother Kundalini, she can also be called Stella Maris or the Virgin of the Sea. She will disintegrate, break the eyes that personify our defects. The interesting thing is to work daily until there is not one, not a single defect left. If one succeeds, one will remain awake. The one who remains awake can change bodies at will. I, for example, can leave this body and enter another body at will. Why? Because, quite simply, my consciousness awake. I worked very hard in ancient eternities to be able to achieve the awakening of my consciousness. And that is an enormous advantage, to awaken the consciousness, to be awake, to know where it comes from, to know where it is going to. What is what exists before birth? What is what exists beyond death? And how does one look when one wakes up? What I'm going to tell you is a bit harsh. Get ready, it is an atomic bomb. When one truly wakes up, one realizes that one's neighbors, who before were considered normal people, one realizes that they are not normal, that they are abnormal. But that is if one wakes up. When one is asleep, one believes that one is normal and everyone around us is normal, correct. But when one wakes up with pain, one realizes that one is stuck in a madhouse, that everyone is crazy. But while one is also crazy, one thinks that one is sane. This is the curious thing about the case. But you see something very interesting. In the madhouse, that's what they call the crazy house, right? It so happens that all those sick people they think they're sane. They think they're sane. When a madman accepts that he's mad, it is an unequivocal sign that he's already healing. Normally, he thinks he's healthy. So, when the doctors see a crazy person who already realizes that he's crazy, that he's sick, then the doctors already begin to look with pleasure that this patient is soon ready to leave the sanatorium. And when he definitively says, yes, right, I'm sick. I was very sick, right? I was crazy. Then the doctors do his psychiatric exams to see how he ends up, what improvement he has obtained. And when really they accept that he was totally cracked and so on, and he answers the questions with sanity, well, they kick him out of the madhouse. There is no more to do. Well, something similar happens with an individual when he wants to wake up. It happens that when someone accepts that he is asleep and that he has an abnormal psyche, it is a sure sign that he is about to wake up. That is very sure. He is about to wake up. But as long as someone says, no, I'm awake and I'm a sane person, well, the poor thing, he's sick. This is the harsh reality of the facts. But then, as I tell you, one only comes to realize it when one has already woken up. Now I'm going to explain some phenomena to you. Thinking here, out loud, with myself, I come to realize some phenomena, let's say interstellar, that happen constantly. Many times the extraterrestrials take some earthling, and they take him with the purpose of studying him in the laboratory of their ships. I know of a specific case of a man who was on Venus. Poor man, here in parentheses. The woman thought he was utterly crazy. She abandoned him and ran away with the children and everything, and the poor man was left alone. A real problem. She still thinks he's utterly crazy. No, there is such, well, he works in auto mechanics. He has to do the exact things, or else, well, he would fail as a mechanic, right? He is a mechanic. Well, that man was actually taken in a cosmic ship to Venus, and this was fully proven. He said where the cosmic ship took him. The Phillips House scientists traveled to the site, and they took soil samples and samples of grass, plants, examined that in the laboratory, and found an unusual atomic disorder at that location. It was verified that the report that the man had given was accurate. But the first thing they did with him was to put him in the cosmic ship's laboratory to study him. And they studied him deeply. Then they took him to Venus, and they kept him on Venus for 5 days. This man saw the mighty Venusian civilization. He says that, for example, that the sidewalks there are not still like ours here, but that they are in movement. So that people get on the sidewalk, they walk, and at the same time, they walk on top of the same sidewalk. That is, they are like bands that rotate, and thus they are quickly transported from one place to another. The dining rooms are wonderful. Those people feed especially on fruits and fish, and prepare all food based on fruits and fish. He knew their library. Their libraries are very different from ours, but splendid too. He knew their sea. They have organized sea fishing. So they don't slaughter the fish just for slaughter them, but strictly those they need for food, and they select them. They take care of marine life enormously. He got to know the interior of other cosmic ships, motherships, etc. The inhabitants of Venus are 1 meter in height, with wavy hair, silvery, falling on their shoulders. The clothing of their spacesuits have the boots forming part of the entire clothing. He also found there 2 earthlings who they had taken, originally from France. They lived happily working in a factory on Venus. Because Venusians have factories, they make everything they need for their lives. Each Venusian works 2 hours a day, and in exchange for that, they have food. They have clothing that the government gives them. They have a house. They have everything. Transportation. Everything they need. So the money there is not necessary. They don't use it. They don't even know about it. Fraternity reigns among all. He says that something that seemed a bit harsh to him, but at the same time intelligent, is that when a child is born, he is very well cared for, but later that child is taken by the government and educated. They raise him in a special city for children, and parents never know about the child that is born. That seemed a little cruel to us because here on Earth, well, parents have their children and take care of them. Not on Venus. They raise them in a city that is for children. They educate them according to the rules of the government. And they educate them according to their profession. And when they are already full-fledged men, or full-fledged women, well, they place them in the environment where they should be placed, in the position where they should work, etc. Well, this man gives all these reports. They brought him back, and he wrote a book entitled, I Was on the Planet Venus. In any case, He draws attention that the first thing they did with him was examine him, study him in the cosmic ship's laboratory. And to many other Earthlings who they have taken, according to the reports they themselves have given upon returning to Earth, the first thing they do is to study them in their laboratory. Why? I'm going to tell you why. Because the Earthlings have an abnormal psyche, as I said, and they do not realize that they are abnormal. But the inhabitants of other worlds, who are not abnormal, who are in their right minds, right? This abnormal psyche of the Earthlings has caught their attention. Thus, they take them precisely in order to see what is happening. So, they study them inside their laboratories with the purpose of discovering what is happening to the Earthlings, what kind of strange subjects they are, who have such a strange psyche, since they destroy each other seasonally. Because there is no doubt that, for example, when the population has reached its maximum, when truly we are about to swallow each other, then nature intervenes, with the plague, or with war, or with both things at the same time. That's obvious. Well, by the way, in these times, what can we expect but that? Plagues and wars. Why? Because there is a demographic explosion. It could not continue to increase the human population indefinitely without nature intervening. There are laws, and nature ends them with the plague or with war, and thus equilibrates the population. So, really, the psyche of the human being has drawn indeed a lot of attention to the inhabitants of other planets, and that is why they have dedicated themselves in recent times to visiting the Earth and studying the Earthlings, to see what is happening. They plan to give help to the Earth. There is no doubt that they will. And they will give it at the most important moment. Unfortunately, I say, the psyche is abnormal, but when we disintegrate the ego, the consciousness awakens, and the psyche becomes normal. Then, and only then, is when we come to realize that we were in a madhouse, or that we are in a madhouse, not before. It is not possible. It is worth working, then, for the awakening of the consciousness that is indispensable. Now, what does seem very hard to me in the Law of Recurrence is having to repeat the same thing in each life. So if a woman leaves her husband in the past existence and went with another guy, then in the new existence, he repeats the same thing. And he comes back and leaves her and goes with the other. That is very serious. How can we make it all come to an end, so that we stop repeating the same comedies, the same dramas, and the same tragedies? What to do? Well, you know that there can be no comedy if there are no actors. And they know that there can be no drama if there are no actors. Actors are needed for there to be dramas. And you know that there can be no tragedies if there are not also actors. So if we want to avoid repeating the same thing, we have no choice but to kill the actors. What are the actors? Well, the eyes that we carry within. Let us look at this case. The woman who left with another, and left the poor man crushed. An act of adultery, of course. We can give it that title, and it really is. In the new existence, she returns and meets her man, and surely the same drama will repeat itself. Soon the third party will appear. How do I make sure that this doesn't happen again? Well, it would be necessary to put an end to the eye of adultery, disintegrate it, turn it into dust. One would have to meditate on it, concentrate on the particular cosmic mother, beg her to reduce it to ashes. By doing that, there is no longer adultery. What if the guy shows up? There's no problem either, because she doesn't feel like adulterating anymore. And that's where the repetition came. Let us suppose that a man in the past existence fought with another, well, in a bar at the age of 30 years. How do I make sure the issue doesn't happen again? Well, disintegrating the ego of anger, if it turns it into dust, repetition in this case becomes impossible. Let's suppose that a man had very serious problems due to some lawsuit in his past existence. How can we do so that this lawsuit does not happen again? Well, it would be necessary to disintegrate the eyes of egoism, and that lawsuit could not exist. We really are machines moved by unknown forces. When a creature is born, the first thing that enters inside the creature is the essence, the psychic part, 3%, which is the only thing that is free, because the remaining 97% is bottled up within the eyes. But the free part permeates the fertilized egg and remains within the body of the creature, so that in a newborn child there is 3% of free consciousness, and that 3% is self-cognizant. How does a newborn child see us? A newborn child sees adults as when you see drunks in the street. So a newborn child sees them. He is awake, because in him, the 3% of awakened consciousness is inside, present, and the eyes have not yet penetrated his body. So he sees adults with pity or horror. But the adults assume that the newborn child is not aware of anything, that he is unconscious. Poor little boy. It is necessary to see for him, but the child is realizing the state in which the adults are, because he's awake. He looks at us sometimes with pity and sometimes with horror. Listen. The newborn has the psychological sense open, that sense remains open between the crown of the head. Located here, it is in this upper part of the head, because the personality has not yet been formed. The personality is formed during the first 7 years and is strengthened over time and with experiences. When the personality is already forged, the ego then enters the child.